This is Remote Daily, your daily dose of inspiration.
Our agenda today, our topic today is to demystify and diversify tech. So excited to have a Nigerian-American technologist, podcaster, the Tech Unlocked podcast, and engineer, and is also the founder of Women of Color in Emerging Tech. Welcome to Remote Daily, Grace MacJones. So good to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here with this amazing community and to not just share my knowledge, but to learn from you all. So thanks for having me, Felix.
You grew up in Nigeria, as far as we learned preparing for the session. Where exactly is your family's home there?
So we moved around a lot, but Abuja, capital, is like where we were at. And I moved to the States we moved to the States when I was about 11. And so a lot of has changed since then. But most of my family is now in the States. I have family here in Texas and Virginia and spread out. I have family in London, in Canada. So I think over the past few years, we've all kind of like migrated out into different places. But yeah.
Well, excuse me. Wow, that's amazing. Just to understand geographically, Lagos is the huge bustling hub of Nigeria, is on the coast, and then Abuja is further inland. It's the political capital of the country.
Yes.
And where the government sits.
Yeah.
And I have to say, there's so many amazing Nigerian American stories in entertainment, in entrepreneurship, and also coming to tech. You told us you started out in graphic design and studied business. How come you took that bridge over to tech? How did it actually happen?
Yeah, it's a long story. There's a lot that happened in those transitions. So growing up, unlike most people, or more like most people, I didn't really know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I feel like some people are like, oh yeah, I want to play basketball. Well, yeah, I want to be, a journalist. People kind of already know. And sometimes that could feel, overwhelming because sometimes I feel like we actually know what we're going to do for the rest of our life, which is definitely unreasonable. But for me, I can say earlier on, I was definitely curious, and I feel like that is my superpower. And I'm glad that my parents didn't really force me to pick a path early, because in Nigeria, or even in Africa in general, there's this notion that, African parents can only be three things: an engineer, a doctor, or a lawyer. Those are like the three main occupations that they want for their kids. And I have friends who it's kind of the thing because they pay for your way through college and things like that.
Engineer, lawyer, doctor. That's it.
High-paying jobs.
Okay. Got it. Yeah, good jobs.
Exactly. And it's not just, I think now that I have friends from different countries like India or even, and Mexico, it's kind of huge cultural countries have the same. Asians, yes, exactly. Like traditions, it's kind of like those are the top three because they pay well and they're somewhat stable, or very stable. So stability is a big thing for cultures like mine. And funny enough, now I'm an engineer, but it wasn't what I was aiming at. But when I, went to school and things like that, like I leaned towards the creativity side of things. And so going to college, I was like, okay, yeah, like I will figure out what I wanted to do. And so it was most likely international relations, because I'm like, okay, I want to be an ambassador. I want to travel. I want to experience new countries and things like that. And then along the way, I also took time off. Like I dropped out because I couldn't afford pay for college. It was a private university at that point, which I got a scholarship, but still college, education in America is, as we all know, really, 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 really can be expensive. And so after taking some time off, that's when I fell into design. Because I'm like, okay, now that I'm not in college, I have to kind of work on certain skills. And I discovered design, photography, and I was like, oh yeah, I think I can do this. I think I can do this. And I was more intrigued about learning about computers and technologies that way. And so I was like, let me enroll in a community college. So I went to a community college, and what they taught was the hardware of computers. Like, this is a CPU, this is this is that. I'm like, okay, this is not the computer knowledge that I wanted to learn, like the actual hardware stuff. And so took some time off, and then finally went to a four-year university here in Houston, State University. And during that time, I worked in our financial office, and basically I worked with, if anyone's familiar with just working in the creative field, working in Photoshop, Illustrator, the whole Adobe suite. And I was really fascinated. I'm like, wow, like without this software, like I wouldn't really have a job. Obviously, the other things I could do. So out of curiosity, I just started doing my research of like, okay, how is, Photoshop created? I didn't even know the right terminology, but basically Photoshop is created through a programming language. And I was like, what's a programming language? And I saw that a programming language was C++. And I just kind of like, okay, this is cool. Like, I think that being able to equip people through software technology was something I'm like, okay, this is really fascinating. And at that time, working with those softwares, I wanted to create like, okay, what if Photoshop had this button that can do this or can do that? So I was just kind of imagining if I was to go in and create a new, we call it now a feature, what would that look like? And then long story short, I decided to study computer science. And that was definitely an interesting journey, coming in and obviously being like the only Black woman in the classrooms and things like that, like things that I didn't really expect or experience, but I did. And coming into tech was something that I was like not sure, even with a degree, I wasn't sure if I was going to work in tech because no one in my family or my circle, I don't think I even had
No
LinkedIn
blueprints.
at that time. So I didn't really
Yeah.
know what I was doing, but I was like, okay, let me just have conversations, talk to people. And what was the key differentiator was, I had a friend who was visiting Houston and I was like, oh, why are you here? She's like, I'm here for a conference. I think this was probably my junior year in college. And I was like, oh, come by, maybe buy a ticket. And she's like, oh, you can't just buy it. It's another type of conference. And obviously it's a tech conference and tech conferences are super expensive. And it's things that you have to plan way ahead of time. But she told me about the conference. The conference was called Grace Hopper Conference, and it actually just happened this year in Orlando. And I was like, okay, cool. So I applied the next year for a scholarship to attend. And through that interaction, met folks, a lot of women who were showcasing their products, writing research papers. And I was really, really inspired and encouraged by that. And that's how I met someone who told me about Microsoft. And here we are.
And shout out to Grace Hopper Conference. I mean, this is a conference I think has been around for forever,
For a while.
in tech terms. So like since the 90s,
Yeah.
is a huge conference, and I think it's focused around
Women in computing.
women computing, right?
Yeah.
And it is very diverse, and it has been the launching pad for many. But I'm still hung up on, Anne said in the chat, it's the same with Asians. I come from Germany. It's the same thing, doctor, lawyer, So before we come to you being the only one, how did your parents react to that when you said, yeah, taking the C++ journey, even I can't explain what it is to you, and you might never understand, but here I am.
Like I said, I'm grateful that my parents were supportive. I believe that they knew whatever I decided to do, that I would go at it wholeheartedly. So they weren't worried of like, oh no, she's going this route. It's like, okay, you're going this route. Because at one point I wanted to study psychology, and they're like, okay, like we can see you like making that happen. And so having parents who are like super encouraging, but also believing that, whatever you do, like you are going to make something out of it. Definitely helped along the way. So I definitely appreciated that. Even now that I work in tech, they don't really know what I do. And I try to explain it, but it's kind of like, oh, okay, as long as you're good, we're good. So
I think this is something that everybody in your generation shares with one another. It's just explaining what you do or what we do. I don't want to say we, because I think I'm much older than you, but even for myself, it's hard. A lot of people have asked, what is Remote Daily? Explain it to me. And I was like, well, okay, got a minute. It's hard to explain because it's all new. It's new job descriptions, it's new markets, it's new technologies. And something that I found really shocking, and when we prepared with you, Grace, Liz, and myself for the session, less than 4% of tech professionals are women of color. Less than 4. I mean, that's basically, you're like a unicorn. I mean, and you just said it, when you realized that when you were training to go into tech, you were like, wait a second, why is there no representation here? Why am I the only one? But did you now you have been on this journey for a while and you're very successful, have you, and you're hosting a podcast about it as well, Have you found a few like key factors for this drastic underrepresentation that you can share with us? Like some, I mean, it's probably always a perfect storm of many reasons, but are there maybe some main reasons that you have by now kind of like boiled down to?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, there's a lot that I would say prevents people, especially women of color, Black women in particular, from maybe being in this field. And it's just access to information, right? Like if you grew up in a town or a space where there wasn't access to learning how to code early, then you're kind of like put against everyone else in terms of like your journey to getting there. But if you're in a good school system, and now there are a lot of actually like, universities or even high schoolers that have programs to learn how to code. And all the organizations that I volunteer for, where it's like we need to expose women to opportunities that exist within tech and computing. And that's something that I didn't really have exposure to. So it's exposing women early and saying like, hey, like you are capable. Like if you want to get into robotics, this is how you can do it. If you want to learn how to build your own video games, you can do it. It's not about maybe being in the status quo of like, this is the only path that you can take as a woman. It's like, no, like here are definitely paths that you can, walk into. And so I love seeing all the organizations that are out here now, like Black Girls Go to Women Who Code. We're encouraging more girls to learn how to code earlier on, so that when they do get into the university route, they're like, okay, yeah, no, this is an option for me. I can actually work in this field because I have been exposed to it at a younger age. And so I think that is one of those things, exposure at an early age. And it's some of the things also systemic. Like if you're not going to a good public school, or even a school in general, where they're able to teach you tech literacy, which is another thing, then you can't imagine seeing yourself in those positions. And so being able to teach folks, we talk about financial literacy. I think tech literacy is so important. Of like, okay, here is how you maybe build a website if you want to build a website and you want to become an entrepreneur, because that's another discussion. Not everyone has to go to college to work in tech. Like everyone has a different path. And so if you're someone that says, okay, college for me is not, no, college is not for me right now, either because you can't afford it, or maybe that's not the route you want to go, then it's like, okay, how can I build something for myself, right? And it doesn't even have to be a business. It could be a content creator that we can see a lot of Gen Z folks doing right now. And it's one of those things where it's going to take a lot of systemic changes to see that type of representation. And then obviously there's hiring. How tech has hired in the past hasn't been inclusive of Black and brown folks. Like I had a friend who was a recruiter. He talked about going to recruit at a certain university, and the questions that they had, they're like, oh, imagine if you were in a, space station and you had to solve this problem. And the kid was kind of like, he couldn't even imagine that because he's not exposed to this kind of things. And so he had to break it down in a way that's relatable. It's like, okay, imagine you're in a basketball court and you and your friends are playing this. How would you solve X, Y, Z? And it's like, oh, I would do X, Y, Z. So representation at every level in the recruiting. And, when we go to tech conferences, who are speaking on stage, if you don't see yourself represented in every level of the whole ecosystem, then it's hard to imagine yourself in those places. And so even with the podcast, I basically created a resource that I wish I had in college, where I'm like, oh, okay, like I know that I can be a data scientist, I can work in robotics, or I can do like Web3 stuff, or even do cybersecurity. So I think that we're on a path to making things better, but it's going to take a while before we get there.
Wow, so strong to hear this from you, and to be able to put yourself in that role. I feel like that is such a key thing, and I can relate to that. Growing up in a small place, like to be able to see yourself doing something is so powerful. And although you're doing it, and I can't mention your podcast enough. Tech Unlocked. Let's just put the link in the chat for you all. Thank you, Liz. Rashad just said we need to drive STEM harder and quicker. And there's a really interesting initiative that just came out from the Biden administration just this month, 1st of December, the Apprenticeship Ambassador Initiative. I'm just going to put the link here in the chat because I want to talk to you about that. So the reason I know about apprenticeships is because they're a very sort of well-known and widely spread way of getting people into jobs in Germany, where I come from. And after living here in the US for a while, I realized that there's a strong drive from some companies mostly smaller companies who are like in the engineering, manufacturing space, to get into this sort of system of apprenticeships, because they need people to handle like very expensive machinery, to train them and to stay with them, to retain them. And then I learned that you also got in touch with Microsoft through an apprenticeship, and I was fascinated because I didn't even know that existed in the tech space. So how does that work? Can you tell us more about apprenticeship in the tech world?
Yeah, happy to talk about apprenticeships. I believe to the question that you had earlier of how can we continue to uh, make tech more diverse, and I think apprenticeship programs are one of this way where we can like open the door and say, okay, not everyone may have a 4-year degree, not everyone may have the requirements, but we can teach you what you need. And so for me, like I said, when I went to that conference, Grace Hopper, I met someone who at a Google event for Women of Color, and we just started chatting. And she was like, hey, like, are you a student? Do you work in tech? I'm like, no, I'm a student. Like, and she said, what do you, like, do you know what you're going to do afterwards? And I was honest. I'm like, I have no clue. And usually I'm not that honest because I don't want to seem like I don't have my life together. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to be honest. And, she was like, oh, okay. Here's a couple of things that you can like think through, and which I appreciate it. And she mentioned the Microsoft Leap apprenticeship program, which I had obviously, like I said, never heard about it. And I wasn't really sure if I was going to get in because I really didn't really know if I fit what they were looking for. But what was definitely unique about the experience was that, she was like, are you a LinkedIn? And I was like, yes. And I literally had just gotten on it. So my LinkedIn was like 5 stars. But she put me in touch with the program manager who was in charge of the program, and sent a kind note. And so it was just up to me after that point to follow up. And then I applied, got in the program, moved to Seattle. And the way the program works, as of right now, is that you're given, if you're accepted, you're given a project to work on, you're placed in a team, and you're there for 16 weeks working on this project. And you're able to, at the end of it, if you were able to, submit it, perform good based on your team's feedback and, the company's requirements, you're offered to interview to be full-time at the company. But right now it's grown since I've been in the program. I think I was in program in 2017 or 2018. It's been a while now. It's not just in America, it's in Kenya, it's in Nigeria. They have different types of apprenticeship, not just software engineers, but for designers, program managers, IT support. So because of the success it has grown so much because tech is more than engineers. Like we need program managers, we need people who can design the things to make it look cool. And so I love that they're branched out of saying, we need people to, and with all different type of backgrounds and skills to work in tech. And so it's been beautiful to see how it's grown and being inclusive from, different parts. And also with the pandemic now, I think most of it is online. So which is great. You don't have to move to Seattle like I did or move to Redmond to participate. And it's not just Microsoft. Google has their own, Spotify, Pinterest. A lot of companies now are using this model. And because it's with tech, talk about hard skills, it's easy to teach those things to people. And it's like, this is the software that we use. This is our procedures. And so if people have other transferable experience from things that they've done, like let's say you work in management or you work in the banking system, you can bring that knowledge with you into the company and also learn how they do things. And in the same way, it's like a win-win situation. And the good part about most tech apprenticeship programs is that they're paid, right? So it's not like I have to just be someone's apprentice and, it's the knowledge that is what I get. It's like, no, we live in a real world. We have bills to pay. There's a lot going on right now. And so with that, it's like, okay, yes, like I can get paid to learn something that is worth value and will continue to gain value over time.
And is this only for young people, or could I also do that? Is it like, how's that?
I
How's
was
that
the
age
youngest
balance?
person in my cohort. Everyone else were people from the military, people who were nurses, people who had different backgrounds. I was the youngest, which is why I didn't think I was going to get in, because usually I can always speak to the Leap apprenticeship. I'm not sure about other companies, but they were looking for people with different skills and talents. So I was like, I just, even though I had different things from like, my design background and things like that, I was like, I don't really know much. I haven't had, a lot of life to live, but like
Fascinating.
I love the cohort I was part of because I met people who were in their 40s and their 50s who had worked in different fields, but now coming into tech, they're able to bring a unique perspective of how they solve the world and how they solve problems, which was the coolest thing. So there isn't a age limit. And which is something I think apprenticeship solves for because, with tech, there is, ageism sometimes where it's kind of
Hmm.
like, okay, am I too old to be in here? And it's like, no, like you're never too old to kind of start a new endeavor or to learn something new. And so I loved seeing the diversity when it came to age, and when it came to other parts. And so I was like, okay, this is definitely a solution worth funding, and
Yeah.
worth people being aware of.
And it seems like it's breaking down a few barriers at once. We've heard here on Remote Daily also so much about ageism in at work, and especially in the tech industry, especially in Silicon Valley, people being rejected just based on the year of birth. And also the other thing that John just put in the chat, he's quoting here, who traditionally does poorly in standardized tests? It's women, marginalized individuals, because, yeah, self-fulfilling prophecy, these tests were not made for
Yes.
them or by their
Yes.
peers. And it seems like these apprenticeships, they cut through both of this. So they cut through ageism in a way, and they also cut through this standardized form of racism that a lot of tests present.
Yeah, and it's interesting because during the pandemic, something that I noticed, a lot of people obviously were trying to fill up their time by going to get their master's, right? And then all of a sudden, a lot of universities like, oh yeah, you don't need to get, your I think you're a GRE or a GMAT, like we're waiving all those things. So I'm like, oh, I thought that was a requirement for knowledge or whatever it was, but because the people knew that with the pandemic things were so uncertain, they waived those, requirements. I'm like, oh, so that form of testing was definitely gatekeeping. And I can go on and talk about different forms of testing or requirements or gatekeeping because there are a lot of people who might not even have the resources to prepare for those tests, don't have that time, even if you're a single mother or if you come from a situation where maybe you're immigrant, you're taking care of your parents, you don't. So there are a lot of things systemically that have withheld people from either getting access to certain things or even having the time or the capability to do certain things. So I think with apprenticeships and other programs that are around now, it's like, okay, yeah, like bring the skills that you already have and let us teach you what we can. At the same time, you're able to earn while doing that, which is very important.
Wow. I'm just thinking for people like me who are like now, okay, maybe I could work at Spotify. Is there a good resource to find out about these apprenticeships? Do you just go to Google and Google like apprenticeship Spotify, or is there like a
Google is your
general
best friend
database?
in this case, and that's what I did. Just type in
Okay,
the company and apprenticeship.
interesting.
Every company has their own requirements. Some company would want you to have worked maybe 6 months to a year in that particular field, so that you're not like super overwhelmed. Especially in big
Hmm.
companies, the way that they work and their organization and their systems, it is a lot to take in if you have no kind of context around it. So usually they require 6 months to a year of having some type of experience. And that's usually maybe the technical part, but the stuff that is not technical, let's say you have done, maybe design for a long time and want to switch to UX, UI, which is user experience, and you have a portfolio, that's great. There are a lot of people now who are self-taught and they don't have then they don't have maybe a college degree and whatever, but they can show like, oh, I've worked for several companies in advertising and marketing. Here is my skills. And then it's one of those things that a lot of companies now are removing the 4-year college degree requirements because they now obviously acknowledge that there are people without degrees that can do exceptional work,
Right.
which is great to see.
Oh, that's such good news. And well, the other thing that I also hope to learn from you is, what is a cloud engineer? Because that's your official job description. And I mean, it sounds kind of nice, to be honest. I always love the word cloud. It's such a smart word to use for, I guess, a server farm. But I don't really know what it means. Like, what can you explain to non-techies what you actually
Yes.
do as a cloud engineer?
It's such an interesting title, and titles change from time to time. It's funny. I was in Vancouver, and my Uber driver like, "What do you do?" We're just talking, having a conversation. I was like, "Oh yeah, I work in the cloud space. I'm a cloud engineer." And he's like, "Oh, cool. So you work for the Weather Channel?" And I was like, "The Weather?
Exactly.
I was like, what? No, I'm not. In my mind, I didn't know how that correlated, but like as someone who's not in tech, I'm just kind of like, oh, I can
Grace is
see
making the
cloud.
weather. Yes.
But basically, when we talk about the cloud, right, I like to break it down as in if you all have an iPhone or even, Samsung, Android, and don't discriminate, where you store your pictures, we call it like iCloud, right? Like you sometimes don't have your stuff on your actual device. And so to simply put it, cloud is just kind of like somebody else's computer somewhere. And so there are companies like Microsoft, Google, Amazon, where people store their information and their data on their systems and their computers so they don't have to take care of it for themselves. And so when it comes to cloud engineering, it's basically for us, either you're building those systems and those software that enables other folks to use them whenever they can, or you're interacting with customers who are actually building in that space. And so I do a little bit of both, of where we work with developer communities who are actually building within the cloud space, and we make sure that they have everything that they need and they're not stuck. And if they run into bugs or errors or things like that, we're there to make sure that their cloud journey is as seamless as possible, but also to get feedback and say like, okay, what features or what other things would you like to see that would make your experience using our cloud service even better? And so it's great hearing from the community of how they're actually using the Azure product and how they're building with it and how it can help them be better when they're building along that space. So I said a lot, but basically the cloud is just a different computer somewhere. And from an individual perspective, there are different types of cloud, but like I use SaaS, which is software as a service. Basically with email, you can get access to your email anywhere. It's not tied to a physical device. That is the cloud in a sense. Netflix, being able to watch Netflix anywhere you go. Like you don't have to have your laptop, your cell phone. You can put in your email and your password. That is because of cloud technology, where it's accessible anywhere, because it's in the cloud.
And I mean, you said it's someone else's computer, which is also a little bit scary to think of, because it means that your emails, which is super personal stuff, might be your business, which means also your photographs, which is basically your life now.
Yeah.
They live on someone else's computer.
Yeah, and go ahead.
Yeah. No, sorry.
No, I mean, that's why people have had, some people have had their whole drive wiped out, or like, oh, I thought it was backed up to this and whatnot, and just kind of like either because of a mistake or something that they
Yes.
did. Technically, it's like, oh yeah, it's kind of like all gone. And so now people, like, even with storing to the cloud, they have certain other storage to make sure it's actual on the hard disk that they can see in their living room or whatnot, because things like that happen.
My good old 4-year-old phone just landed in a puddle after the last rainstorm here in New York, and I went to a store and got a new phone, and I was like, so how does this? Well, and he said, yeah, the cloud.
Cloud, yeah.
And I had a backup,
Wow.
a recent one, so I didn't lose a lot. But he said sometimes people come into the store, they get a new phone because their old one completely broke down, and then they're like, yeah, sure, it's backed up, and then he looks it up, and the last backup is from like 5 years ago, and then they lose.
No.
They
All
lose that
that.
entire time of their lives, basically, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what happens when you maybe rely a little bit too much on someone else's computer, and the fact that you're managing your content there.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? Do you use the cloud with everything? I mean, you're a cloud engineer, so... Or
I
are you
mean-
like, no. A lot of people in Silicon Valley are like anti-tech now, so...
It's interesting, I feel
judgment.
like a lot of people in our society now have a love-hate relationship with technology. We love the convenience of it. We love the access. We love doing this right now, talking from everywhere around the world and being able to connect. And so there are benefits that we love. And then there are also the parts of, okay, data, like who has my email? Or when we talk here about data breaches of like, oh, this company was hacked and now like your information might be somewhere else. And it's one of those things where I definitely feel, because of the pandemic and other things that led through it, and I keep referencing that because we're probably talk about Web3 and the metaverse, but a lot of our lives are already on digital platforms. It's hard to separate it because of how almost everything we do has an underlayer of technology to it, whether that's
Yeah.
ordering food, learning online, shopping. Like, it's kind of hard to name an experience and say, oh, you can't find that online or use technology to do that. So with that kind of I would say access to information, access to so many things, it's hard to figure out like, okay, how much of tech for myself is good and how much isn't. And it's up to us to draw those boundaries and say, okay, no, like, after 10 p.m., no doom scrolling. I'm, done with, the screens and things like that, or I don't keep my phone in my bed, my bedroom, I put it out, in the kitchen somewhere so I can get up in the morning to go get it and it's not easy access and so many things. So I think that the more technology continues to advance, the more as humans we have to be much more self-aware of how much we want it to influence us. So we don't say, oh, okay, technology made me do this or I, XYZs, but also we know that companies have certain responsibilities with how they handle our data or even how they curate their platforms, whether that's Facebook, Instagram, Google, Microsoft, whatever it is. So this is a different conversation that we can jump into, but it's definitely an interesting time to be alive.
And how you said no, you don't have your phone in the bedroom. That's rule number one.
Yes,
And
and that's
other?
something that just came out of wanting to wake up earlier to work out because I also have an Apple Watch because I want to track my fitness and things like that. And then not snoozing because that's something I'm like, I need to stop. So if I hear it, I have to get up and then go get it. And if I stand up, I'm not going to go back to bed. I'm like, okay, great. I have to start my
Snoozing
day.
guilty as charged.
Yeah. So it happens to most of us.
Let's talk about Web3 for a moment, because you just mentioned it. So I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, but as far as I understand, and we just started working with a company who is in that space at Remote Daily, and we hope that we are able to host a show in a three-dimensional space soon. As far as I understand, Web3 is kind of the internet, but three-dimensional. So you go to, maybe in the future, you go to your bank, whatever it is, .com, and instead of having like a plain two-dimensional space there, you might actually go into the bank with an avatar or with your like whatever ID.
So you're talking about the metaverse. That's something completely different. So that's interesting.
Help me, please.
That's totally fine. There's a lot of tech buzzwords happening right now, and it's good to see that people are interested, engaged. But the metaverse is much more, and regardless of how you feel about it, 3D experiences and things like that, it's definitely going to happen. But it's this concept that it says that we're going into a more immersive experience of the internet and beyond. And basically what that means is that, people who, if you've ever been in VR, AR, so you're like, okay, yeah, like you feel like you're in a like different world, and
you're
it's
wearing
not one of those
something.
things. Yeah, it's not one of those things where, oh, like you can never leave. It's basically just kind of like an intertwine of the virtual world, the digital world, and the real world. Like if you watch Iron Man or those like Marvel TV shows or even movies, you see how they use technology to kind of interact with each other, but in a sense where it's more immersive. And when we say immersive, it feels more real. So right now we're a 2D plane where it's like, I see you, you see me. But in 3D, it's like, then you don't see like maybe my ceilings or things like that. It's like, oh, we're actually like maybe in a living room or in a meeting room or things like that. And so that's something that is definitely going to happen. I would say if the pandemic didn't happen, I'd be like, no, that's a lot of BS. I don't think that's going to happen. But seeing how much time we all spent on the internet through FaceTime, Zoom calls, and people, through WhatsApp groups, Telegram, I was like, oh, okay, this will be a thing where if we're not able to physically be with people, we definitely need ways to connect and interact in a way that feels human and that feels real. Yes, people know that Meta or Facebook is building some parts of it, but it's more than just a 3D digital experience. And so the actual full ideology of the metaverse isn't something that's going to be built to the next probably 10 or 20 years, because we don't even have the hardware devices to power some of the things that we talked about. If anyone's interested in learning more, I would definitely recommend reading the book, The Metaverse by Matthew Ball. And he has certain even essays online writing out the criteria of what the metaverse will be and what it won't be. So which is a good way to kind of differentiate the difference. And so with Web3 simply put is the next iteration of the internet, right? With Web1, we just saw static information. And, you know, companies like maybe Netscape, AOL, Yahoo, like remember those are like the beginning, like, you know, companies who actually were around during that time. And we just shared information. You know, there was a time where people didn't post their vacation photos because there was nowhere to post them.
Those were
You
the
went on
days.
Wikipedia, you just wanted to read the blogs, and that literally was it. That was kind of like people would say the first version of the internet in the 90s. In the 2000s, there was this boom of content, right? Like, okay, I want to post my vacation photos. I want to post my baby's photos, like my granddaughter. I want people to see. I want to interact. Then we have Facebook, we have Instagram, we have all the things. Even now it's TikTok. It's like, oh my gosh, like we're in everyone's lives. And tech companies know that we want to stay connected. So they say, hey, this is free. Just give us your information to log in and stay logged in. And we get access to all these things that nobody ever reads. I haven't read the terms of agreement or anything. And we're like, oh yeah, for the price of convenient. But it costs something because tech companies wouldn't give you that access if they get nothing in return, advertising. And so now it's kind of like, okay, how do I, you know, make sure that my data, you know, is like I have some type of say of what it's used for, who it's sold to. We don't really have that say because we have would we sign our rights over and say like, yeah, like do whatever it is that you want to do because I want to use your platform.
And that might change in the next generation of the internet.
Yes, in
so
Web3,
that we get more ownership.
Yes, where you don't really have to say, okay,
right.
This is my name, this is my email, this is my gender, this is my everything. Like, I don't know about you all, but every time I sign up I'm like, why do I have to give the same information every time? Why can't I just have one identity? It's interruptible, and I can use it anywhere online. One password. And with Web3, it's based on, you know, decentralization, which is obviously supported by blockchain technology. And right now, we're not fully there. There's a lot of hot mess when it comes to Web3 and crypto. I'm sure everyone's well aware of it. But people were invested in this. I think at the top of 2022, there's been over $18.5 billion invested through VC companies. So a lot of people are building right now. And so we might not be able to see the impact of Web3 for the next 5 to 10 years because there are companies and people who are building it right now. And that's why, like, with my podcast and the information that I send, I'm like, I want people to be aware of what's happening so that if someone say, okay, like, how do we, you know, handle assault in the metaverse? Like, if someone's like, how did that work? You know, so to ask questions to make sure things are ethical. What is the age limit of someone using something that's a 3D device and they step into, I don't know, a club or a bar? Like, what does that experience look like? And so if there are people who have experiences all in, you know, in a different, whether that's, you know, being a lawyer or that's being in law enforcement or that's being fitness or whatever it is, you can now think about, okay, if we're moving to a more immersive world, what is my play in it, right? And so I don't want people to say, oh, that's for the technologists or the techies, the smart people. Like, no, like we all use the internet now. So it's all part of our world in a sense. And I think that it'd be great for people to kind of see, okay, how do I see myself in this new world and what do I want to contribute to it? Because there's a quote that says the best way to build the future, to predict the future is to build it. And people are building it right now, whether we're aware of it, whether we like it, it's being built right now. Yeah.
And John just put in the chat a super optimistic quote about the metaverse, saying 5 to 7 years from now, most of us will live in this world. Crazy. Last question, because we only got 1 minute left. I can't believe it. Crazy. It's too much fun to talk to you. I wish we had another hour. But there have been huge tech layoffs, tens of thousands actually since the year started. So even though the base of tech in our lives is growing, there's also a crisis, right? So what you just said, you know, see yourself in the world, build it. Where do you see yourself in the future of the tech world? Let's say in 3 years from now.
You know, 3 years from now, I think I definitely want to be doing what I'm doing in the sense of sharing information, making sure it's accessible to people and knowing that, you know, if you want to get into tech, this is what you can do. But also being on the lines of working with emerging technologies, whether that's AI or even quantum computing, because I feel like those things are fascinating. And I've discovered that if I don't go after those things in a curious manner, it's not going to come to me. People are like, oh, Grace, like, what would you love to learn today? It's like, I have to pursue those things. And because of my community, either being a person who's an immigrant or a person of color. I'm like, I would want to be able to share those things with them so they have access to being in those spaces. And so for me, the future has unlimited possibilities, and I'm excited to be in tech and keep opening the doors for other people to come besides me and along me.
Fantastic. It's so good to know that you are going to be a part of this future. If there's more people like you working in tech, we really don't have to worry and can be happy about what's next. Thank you so much, Grace, for being our guest today. And these are the last 30 seconds of the show. Is there anything you would still like to share with us? An announcement, a personal mantra, or just a little greeting for the weekend?
Yeah, I definitely say, know that you have the power to make change, whatever that looks like to you. I know sometimes it might feel that the world is ending, which it feels like it might be, but we have the power to make whatever change that we want to. And if anyone's interested about like working in tech or has more questions, definitely free to reach out. I'm Grace MacJones on LinkedIn, on Twitter. I'm always happy to have conversations like this.
Awesome. Grace MacJones, a guiding light in this world of tech. I hope we can host you again. And I'll definitely listen to your podcast, Tech Unlocked. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. Enjoy the rest of your meeting-free Friday.
Well, thank you so
and
much.
Have a restful weekend. And I hope to see you again soon. And I hope for everyone who is here with us, thank you for taking the time. Bye-bye, everyone.
This is Remote Day.